Next, let's talk about glacial erosion. Before we do, it's probably good to talk a little bit about geologic time again. And some of the more recent part of geologic time we mentioned before, we're in the Cenozoic era, and in there we're in the Quaternary period. And then that has two parts to it. It has the Pleistocene and the Holocene. And the Pleistocene is about 2.5 million years up till about 10,000 years ago. And also it's commonly known, this is when we had ice ages. So the ice ages occurred for over a few million years and up to about 10,000 years ago. Since then, we've been in a period called the Holocene. And so for the past 10,000 years, we've had a very stable climate and not much ice, no ice ages. So pretty warm, pretty stable. Before the Holocene, it was very erratic. The climate would cool down very rapidly over a number, over the thousands of years, and then we'd have ice ages. And it's during the Pleistocene that you had more glaciation that has shaped California. So this is North America. This is sort of a recreation of North America before the ice ages. Most notably different is the absence of the Great Lakes and other large water features on the East Coast. But also part of the Central Valley is underwater because when this is a very warm period when sea levels were higher because there wasn't very much ice. But as we get into the ice ages, that water went lower and kind of went, was further off the coast. And the main feature we see here is called the continental ice sheet that covered much of North America. But if you look over here down the Sierra Nevada, these are what are called mountain glaciers. We'll focus a bit more on those because they're the ones that we didn't have a big ice sheet in California, but we did have mountain glaciers. And as the ice retreated, it reshapes the landscape over this wide area, but it's hard to see here, but it also reshaped areas like the Sierra Nevada. So let's define some stuff. Glaciers, these are moving, flowing masses of ice on the land, as opposed to, say, sea ice or something like that. This is ice that accumulates on the land. There's two general types. We have continental ice sheets, form over wide areas, like during the ice ages here, but also mountain glaciers. And the mountain glaciers are the ones that have most impacted California, like in the Sierra Nevada in particular. All right, so today, glaciers cover about 10% of the Earth, and they move slow and they have a lot of energy. And back in the ice ages, about a third of the Earth was covered in ice, including much more of the mountain ranges that then have ice today. Another side effect of the ice ages is that if you have all of this ice up on the land, that will actually lower the sea level as well. Because there's only a fixed amount of water on the Earth. If you have more of it up on the land, then that's less water to be out in the ocean. So mountain glaciers form in they create steep-sided valleys like Yosemite Valley. And they profoundly will reshape these valleys as they move through them because of the power of the moving ice. The ice moves very slowly, but with tremendous amounts of energy because of the weight and its ability to erode. And what they create is U-shaped valleys. So we mentioned before that streams, they create V-shaped valleys because the water is eroding down kind of like a knife into a V shape. Now, glaciers come along, they're kind of like an ice cream scoop, and they will turn that V-shaped valley into a U-shaped valley. Not all glacial valleys are perfectly U-shaped. Hopefully you saw the video about Yosemite Valley, how it is more of a box shape, but that's because of sediments that accumulated within that U-shaped valley. So here's the evolution. You start with a stream valley, like the one that had existed prior in Yosemite Valley. And then during the ice ages, Yosemite Valley filled up with ice. And it eroded out different shapes underneath the ice. And as the ice retreated, as we went out of the ice ages, we get left with the stuff that had been recarved by the ice, big U-shaped valleys, waterfalls, that sort of thing. So just to show you in photos, this is a river valley here, a V-shaped valley on the left under A, and this is a U-shaped glacial valley here on the right. And where you can find a glacial valley near us that's most well known is Yosemite Valley. Yosemite Valley was carved out by glaciation. One other side feature is that during the ice ages, you had big, what are called Pleistocene lakes or ice age lakes that formed in the basin and range area of the United States, including the parts in California. You had just massive freshwater lakes like Lake Bonneville, which is the only remnant is now the Great Salt Lake, but also a few in the Mojave as well. You had some remnant lakes, so that now we have what are just sort of dry lake beds, and much of the Mojave Desert that had been a lake during the ice ages. So you can still see the imprint of these lakes in the desert landscapes of California.